Vote evidentiary hearing session is called to order this Tuesday, September 21st, 2021 at 2 p.m. My name is John Morissette, member and presiding officer of the Connecticut Siting Council. Can everyone hear me okay? Very good, thank you. As everyone is aware, there's currently a statewide effort to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. This is why the council is holding this remote hearing, and we ask for your patience. If you haven't done so already, I ask that everyone please mute their computer audio and or telephones now. A copy of the prepared agenda is available on the council's docket number 502 webpage, along with the record of this matter, the public hearing notice, instructions for public access to this remote public hearing, and the council's citizens guide to citing council's procedures. Other members of the council are Mr. Ed Edelson, Mr. Silvestri, Ms. Cooley, Mr. Lynch, Executive Director Melanie Bachman, Staff Analyst Robert Mercier, and Physical Administrative Officer Lisa Fontaine. This evidentiary session is a continuation of the remote public hearing held on July 13th, 2021 and August 31st, 2021. It is held pursuant to the provisions of Title 16 of the Connecticut General Statutes and of the Uniform Administrative Procedure Act upon an application from Selco Partnership, DBA Verizon Wireless, for a certificate of environmental compatibility and public need for the construction, maintenance, and operation of a telecommunications facility located at 118 Newtown Road, Woodbridge, Connecticut. Please be advised that the council's project evaluation criteria under the statute does not include consideration for property value. A verbatim transcript will be made of this hearing and deposited with the Woodbridge Town Clerk's Office for the convenience of the public. The council will take a 10 to 15 minute break at a convenient juncture around 3:30. We have a motion on the agenda. On September 16th, 2021, Winnie submitted a motion for hearing continuation to accept SHPO rulings or in an alternative to deny the application as incomplete. Attorney Bachman may wish to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Morissette. As you mentioned, on September 16th, Winnie submitted a motion for a hearing continuation or in the alternative to deny the application as incomplete on the basis that a SHPO determination has not been submitted for the alternative site suggested by Winnie at 15 Meeting House Lane. On September 17th, Selco objected to Winnie's motion. Selco submitted this application on May 13th, 2021 for a tower site at 118 Newton Road. The council deemed the application complete on June 3rd, 2021. The council solicited comments from SHPO and other state agencies on June 4th, 2021. SHPO did not comment on the site that is proposed in the application at 118 Newton Road, and there is no pending application for a tower site at 15 Meeting House Lane. Therefore, staff recommends that the motion be denied as well as its alternative. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Bachman. Is there a motion?
Ed Edelson, a motion to deny the request from the town and from Winnie. Excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Edelson. Is there a second?
Silvestri, I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Silvestri. We have a motion and a second to deny the motion on the table. Any discussion? Mr. Edelson.
I just would like to make the point that there seems to be confusion about our process, which is we get to review an application that's put before us. We don't get to review all the possible sites that might be out there. And so I'm very confused why council or the intervenors would put something like this forward when we're very clear about the fact that we get to review and approve or deny a particular application. And so I found this to be almost disingenuous in its intention. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edelson. Any discussion? Mr. Silvestri?
Thank you, Mr. Morissette. Couple comments. The application for a cell tower at 118 Newton Road was indeed deemed complete. But again, I'd like to note that the application was not for 4 Meeting House Lane or 15 Meeting House Lane. Those two parcels arose during the proceedings and as potential, how should we say, alternate locations. And their potential suitability appears to be a topic for the continued evidentiary hearing today. However, should the applicant wish to pursue the location of a cell tower at these sites, or for that matter, any other site, a new application with specific details for a new site would be necessary. But at this point, the applicant did not include Meeting House Lane as a desirable alternative location with a due diligence application accordingly. So for those reasons, I'll be voting to deny the motion for the hearing continuation and regarding SHPO's ruling as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Silvestri. Ms. Cooley, any discussion?
No, I have no discussion. I believe the other council members have succinctly stated our position, and which I agree with.
Thank you, Ms. Cooley. Mr. Lynch, any discussion? Mr. Lynch, any discussion?
No discussion, Mr. Chairman. I think everything that needed to be said has been said.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. I also have no further discussion, and I do agree with Mr. Edelson and Mr. Silvestri in their comments. We will now move to the vote. Mr. Edelson, how do you vote?
I vote to approve my motion, which was to deny the request. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edelson. Mr. Silvestri, how do you vote?
Vote to approve the motion to deny. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Cooley, how do you vote?
I also vote to approve the motion to deny.
Thank you, Ms. Cooley. And Mr. Lynch, how do you vote?
I do vote to approve the motion to deny.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. And I also vote to approve the motion to deny. We have a unanimous decision. The motion is passed and it is denied. Thank you. We will now continue with the appearance of the town of Woodbridge.
Excuse me, Mr. Morissette. This is Mark Greengarden.
Yes, Mr. Greengarden.
I'd like the record to reflect that I object to the council's decision to deny the continuation. Taking the feedback we received from the council members.
It is not your time to speak, Mr. Greengarden. Please hold off until it's your moment to speak. Thank you. In accordance with the council's September 1st, 2021 conclusion of evidentiary hearing memo, we will commence with the appearance of the town of Woodbridge. Will the town of Woodbridge present their witness panel for the purpose of taking the oath? Attorney Bachman will administer the oath.
Thank you, Mr. Morissette. Nicholas Beaumonte on behalf of the town of Woodbridge. With me is the town's first selectwoman, Beth Heller, who is ready to be sworn at Attorney Bachman's discretion.
Thank you, Attorney Beaumonte. Attorney Bachman.
Thank you. If the first selectman could just raise her right hand. Do you solemnly swear or sincerely affirm, as the case may be, that the evidence you shall give concerning this case is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God, or upon penalty of perjury?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Attorney Bachman. Could Attorney Bonanti please begin by verifying the exhibits by the appropriate sworn witnesses?
Will do, Mr. Morissette. Okay, good afternoon, Ms. Heller. I'm just going to ask you a couple very quick questions about the document that we filed back in July as your pre-filed testimony. For everyone's sake, that's identified in the hearing program as Roman 4B2. So, Ms. Heller, are you familiar with the pre-filed testimony document that I'm referring to?
Yes.
And do you have any clarifications or corrections to that document?
No.
Is that document true and accurate to the best of your knowledge?
Yes.
And do you adopt that document as your testimony in this matter?
Yes.
Mr. Morissette, I offer Ms. Heller's pre-filed testimony as a full exhibit.
Thank you, Attorney Bamonte. Does any party or intervener object to the admission of the town of Woodbridge's exhibits? Attorney Baldwin.
Mr. Morissette, I don't have an objection, but I just have a question. If Ms. Heller is also going to be verifying the Woodbridge responses to council interrogatories.
Very good question, Attorney Bamonte.
Yeah, I mean, I could certainly walk her through those as well. I know that some of the other parties had not gone through the verification process for their interrogatory responses, so I wasn't sure what the council's preference was here, but happy to do that very quickly as well. So,
thank you, Attorney Bamonte. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Morissette. So, Ms. Heller, you and I have spoken offline, but are you also familiar with the interrogatory responses that the town prepared and also filed earlier this summer in this pending matter?
Yes.
Okay, and are those answers, well, I will ask first, do you have any clarifications or corrections to those answers that the town provided?
No.
And are those answers true and accurate to the best of your knowledge?
Yes.
And so I guess we can also adopt that as part of your testimony in this matter. Do you agree to that?
Yes.
Okay, so Mr. Morissette, I think that covers us as far as our interrogatory responses and the specific pre-filed testimony. So I offer those as a full exhibit.
Thank you, Attorney Bamonte. Okay, does Attorney Baldwin?
No objection from the applicant, Mr. Morissette. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Baldwin. Attorney Ainsworth.
No objection, sir.
Thank you. Mark and Michelle Greengarden.
No objection.
Thank you. The exhibits are hereby admitted. We'll now begin with the cross-examination of the town by the council, starting with Mr. Mercier, followed by Mr. Edelson. Mr. Mercier.
Yes, thank you. Just going through the town's responses to the council interrogatories. You know, interrogatory 1 stated that the town is willing to consider hosting a tower at one of several properties in the Meeting House Lane area. 2 of the properties were the police station at 4 Meeting House Lane, and the other property was the Public Works facility at 15 Meeting House Lane. Assuming that a tower developer or carrier wanted to build a tower at one of these town properties, what process would they have to follow to get a town approval for a lease?
Should I answer that?
Ms. Heller, if
Okay.
you know the answer, yes, you can go ahead.
I'm not completely certain of the entire answer, but I know that it would definitely require approval of the Board of Selectmen, of which I am one member. Other than that, I would have to get back to you. The other steps of the process.
Okay, I'm just wondering if that the board would require like public meetings, something of that nature.
Mr. Mercier, if I could just add, this is Nicholas Bamonte. I believe there also may be, in terms of public meetings, a review required by the Planning and Zoning Commission under General Statutes 8-24 for the leasing of municipal property. That isn't a binding decision. It's a recommendation by the P&Z, although that would be at a public meeting. So that is one more additional element of this process that I believe would be part of the steps necessary to actually reach an approved lease if a tower provider was in fact interested in taking advantage of those properties.
This is Gerald Weiner. I'm town attorney, and I just like to add one thing to that statement. That
excuse me, Mr. Weiner.
Yes.
You are not a sworn-in witness in this matter, and are not on the hearing list of agenda for testimony. And in fact, Attorney Bamonte, please refrain from providing evidentiary information going forward. It's the witness that needs to answer the questions. But thank you for the information regardless.
Martin, I believe I'm a counsel of record in this case for Woodbridge. I'm not 100% sure, but I might be. I think I am. But
let's check on that. Thank you. If you are, then that would be a different story. I apologize. I don't see you. Attorney Bachman, would you wish to comment?
As far as we know, Mr. Morissette, he's not a counsel of record. Should he have been listed as a witness? Yes.
Okay. I thought I was listed as counsel. I've been getting copies of everything. That's fine. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, the representative for the party is listed as Attorney Bloom and Attorney Bamonte.
Okay. Thank you.
Down.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please continue. So First Selectman Heller, did you have more to respond?
No, I do not.
Okay. Attorney Mr. Mercier, please continue.
Thank you. In regards to the 4 Meeting House Lane site, that's the police station. There's an existing tower there on the south side of the building. Did the town have if that parcel, police station parcel, was considered for a tower facility, is there a specific location on the property where a new tower could go? Would it be where the existing tower is, or adjacent to it, or somewhere else? Wasn't sure if that was discussed with anybody at the police department.
It was not at this point, as far as I know.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
And the other property of interest was the 15 Meeting House Lane Public Works facility. Was there any discussion as to, or thought as to where a new tower facility could go on that particular parcel?
I believe there was some thought and discussion regarding that matter, but we'd have to clarify that. I can't answer that for certain.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Now, if a new tower went up on either of those parcels, is the town concerned about any visual impact to the adjacent Woodbridge Green Historic District?
I'm not certain of that answer. I'd have to get back to you and look at the maps or the where it would be for sure.
Okay, yeah, I guess that would be where the tower would go would obviously play into that. So okay, thank you. I have no other questions at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Mercier. We will now continue with Mr. Edelson, followed by Mr. Silvestri. Mr. Edelson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Morissette, and thank you for Selectwoman Heller for being here as a witness. So my first question is just from your perspective, and I think speaking maybe for your board, do you consider that the town of Woodbridge has reliable and good coverage, cell service coverage, to be part of the infrastructure of the town?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, if all of a sudden all of the carriers, Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, whatever, they all said, we're no longer going to service the town of Woodbridge, would you feel that the quality of life and the ability of people to conduct their business would be interfered with, and that would have a detrimental effect on the town of Woodbridge? That's one way to look at it.
I would imagine so.
Or another way, it's more, I would say from my own perspective, 20 years ago, we might have said cell service was a nice thing to have, versus today, for people to conduct their lives from an emergency response point of view, from just a information point of view of being in touch with people, cell service has become almost a necessity. And that's why I use the word infrastructure, because I think if I were in your position, if all of a sudden you no longer had a volunteer fire department, you would say, well, then we have a problem with our infrastructure in town. Or if you no longer had an ambulance service, people would say, we are missing something that we're required to have in this town. And I want to get a sense of where you see, in terms of those priorities, the importance, and I would say the benefit of having cell service.
I do think it is important to have cell service in our town.
Thank you. Because it's important in our work that we're always trying to balance public benefit versus environmental and community impacts. So we always have to look at both sides of the ledger. Now, as you probably heard from the questioning going on, we as a council are limited really to looking at applications that come before us. One of the things a town can do is look at a whole area and say, this is how you could go about providing service for the whole town, identifying where gaps might be, where future towers could be, or other devices for providing the cell service. So my question is, are you aware of the town of Woodbridge either considering or conducting a town-wide study of the coverage and capacity of cell service in the town of Woodbridge?
The town conducting a study?
Yeah, typically with a consultant, not
I'm not aware of the town conducting a study.
Are you aware that other towns in Connecticut, and I'm thinking here of New Canaan, have done this in order to identify where gaps are and where probable good locations for future towers might be? So it's done in a comprehensive fashion that puts all of the impacts before the town, or before the town and the people at one time?
I am not aware of that.
Well, again, thank you for being here, and thank you, Mr. Morissette. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Edelson. We'll now continue with cross-examination by Mr. Silvestri, followed by Ms. Cooley. Mr. Silvestri.
Thank you, Mr. Morissette, and good afternoon, First Selectwoman Heller. Thank you. Mr. Mercier and Mr. Edelson kind of asked most of the questions I was going to pose, so I do have one that's remaining. And First Selectwoman Heller, in your response to our first set of interrogatories on page 1, it's listed, in addition, subject to confirmation that no legal impediments exist. And then it goes on to say, conditioned upon Board of Alderman approval, the town's willing to consider different town-owned properties. The question I have for you, do you know of any legal impediments that exist for either 4 Meeting House or 15 Meeting House Lane?
Not at this point.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Morissette, that's the only question I have at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Silvestri. We'll now continue with cross-examination by Ms. Cooley, followed by Mr. Lynch. Ms. Cooley.
Thank you, Mr. Morissette. Thank you, First Selectman Heller, for joining us today. We appreciate your time that you're giving us. And I just have one question, and that is, has the town, or to your knowledge, has the town received any complaints from town residents about their ability to access cell service anywhere in town or while driving through town?
I'm not aware of any.
Okay, thank you. That's all that I have.
Thank you, Ms. Cooley. We'll now continue with cross-examination by Mr. Lynch, followed by myself. Mr. Lynch.
No further questions, Mr. Morissette.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. I have a follow-up question along the lines of Mr. Mercier and Mr. Silvestri, having to do with question 1, and concerning Meeting House, the 2 sites at Meeting House Road. Has there been any further clarification or consideration within the town about those 2 sites?
Within the town, there has not been.
Very good. So it's basically where you've left it off with the response of question 1. Has there been any further discussion with any carriers to develop either of those sites, including the applicant?
Not that I'm aware of.
Very good. Thank you. That concludes my questions as well. We will now continue with cross-examination of the town by the applicant. Attorney Baldwin.
Just a couple quick questions. Ms. Heller, when you talked about the process to get town approval for use of town property, you mentioned Board of Selectmen approval. And just to clarify, you mentioned in your response to interrogatory number 1, Board of Aldermen. Is Woodbridge an alderman township, or is it a Board of Selectmen ruled township?
It is a Board of Selectmen.
Thank you. And then Attorney Bamonte mentioned the 8-24 process from the general statutes. Did that refresh your recollection at all as to what else might have to happen for the town to proceed with a lease of town property? Are you familiar with the 8-24 process?
Sure. I would have to defer to our town council or our attorney for that opinion, which is what we usually do in these cases.
Fair enough. Thank you. Last question. Can you confirm to the Citing Council that the property at 4 Meeting House Lane and at 15 Meeting House Lane also lies in the town's A residence zone, like the subject parcel in this application?
I cannot confirm that. I believe it is, but I can't confirm it.
Okay, thank you. Nothing further, Mr. Morissette.
Thank you, Attorney Baldwin. We will continue with cross-examination of the town by the group party and intervenors and SEPA intervenors, Winnie, Mark and Michelle Greengarden, and Oschner Place, LLC. Attorney Ainsworth, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First Selectman Heller, is it your understanding that the carriers are threatening to no longer service the town in any fashion or cell service?
I'm not aware of that at all.
Okay. So that doesn't seem like a reasonable threat of possibility?
I'm not aware of it.
Now, with regard to 15 Meeting House Lane, did the town give permission to Winnie to conduct a CW drive test to test out a potential cell tower at that location?
Yes.
And what was the reason that the town gave the permission to do that?
I believe the reason was to consider it as an alternate site.
And if the town had considered that site to be inappropriate in some fashion, just from a general policy standpoint, would it have given that permission?
You said inappropriate?
Inappropriate, yes. If the town had thought this was not a good site because for town policy reasons, would it have given that permission to do that test?
I can't speak on behalf of the other selectmen, but I would have said that I would not have given permission.
And within the historic green district at the center of town, is there also not the police station?
That's correct.
And does that police station have a radio tower that's currently in existence within that district?
Yes,
And is, are you aware of whether or not the town garage at 15 Meeting House Lane is within the district or outside of it?
I believe it is within, to the best of my knowledge.
And did the town also give permission for for Winnie to conduct a test at the 4 Meeting House Lane site?
I'm not sure about that. I would have to check. I do remember the 15 Meeting House Lane. I'm not sure about number 4.
Okay. I have no further questions. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Attorney Ainsworth. We'll now continue with cross-examination by Mark and Michelle Greengarden. Mr. Greengarden.
Thank you. Selectman Heller, I just have one question. If proposed, do you support having a tower located at 15 Meeting House Lane
On a personal level, I do.
versus the 118 Newton Road site?
I do. Me personally, yes, I do.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Greengarden, and thank you, First Select Person Heller.
You're
And
welcome.
I will continue with the appearance of the group party interveners and secret interveners, Winnie, Mark and Michelle Greengarden, and Oschner Place. We will continue with the appearance of the group party interveners and secret interveners to swear in their new witness, Mitchell Schmook, and verify the new exhibits marked as Roman numeral 3, items B7 on the hearing program. And also, Shelley Greengarden, if she's going to testify.
I'll leave it up to the Greengardens to determine that, whether Shelley will be there. I understand that she's present. But, I have with me here today Mitchell Schmook. He is ready to be sworn in.
Thank you, Attorney Ainsworth. Attorney Bachman, please begin by swearing Mr. Schmook.
Thank you, Mr. Morissette. Given that the parties are grouped, could we perhaps swear in both witnesses at the same time, including Ms. Greengarden?
Yes.
Thank you. Could the witnesses please just raise their right hand? Do you solemnly swear or sincerely affirm, as the case may be, that the evidence you shall give concerning this case is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God, upon penalty of perjury?
Yes, I do.
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Bachman. Attorney Ainsworth, please begin by identifying a new exhibit you have filed in this matter and verifying the exhibit by the appropriate sworn witness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The hearing program identifies late file exhibit 3B7. And my address is going to be to Mr. Schmook and Mr. Maxon and Marie Grattan, who are also present. And I remind them that they are still under oath from the previous proceeding. So with regard to exhibit or late file exhibit 3B7, which is the report by Isotrope with the appendix and photographs at 15 Meeting House Lane, did you at my request assist in conducting a crane test and CW drive test for the 15 Meeting House Lane in the production of that document? And
Yes,
I'll have to start with each one of you. Mr. Schmook?
Yes, I did.
Mr. Maxon?
Yes, I did.
And Ms. Grattan?
Yes, I did.
And with regard to Mr. Schmook, did you also take photographs that appear in the appendix to 3B7?
Yes, I did.
And with regard to all three of you, do you have any deletions, additions, or corrections to exhibit 3B7? And I'll start with Mr. Schmook.
No, I don't.
Mr. Maxon?
No.
Ms. Grattan?
No.
And does Exhibit 3B7 represent a true and accurate copy of the late file testimony that you prepared or assisted in preparing? Mr. Smook?
Yes, it does.
And Mr. Maxon?
Yes.
Ms. Grattan?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. And do each of you adopt Exhibit 3B7 as your testimony before the council today? Mr. Smook?
Yes, I do.
Mr. Maxon?
Yes.
And Ms. Grattan?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. I offer 3B7 as a full exhibit and the panel for cross-examination.
Thank you, Attorney Ainsworth. Does any party or intervener object to the omission of Winnett's exhibits? Attorney Baldwin?
Thank you.
Attorney Bamonte?
No objection, Mr. Morissette.
Thank you. The exhibits are hereby admitted. We'll now begin with cross-examination of Winnett, Mark and Michelle Greengarden, and Oschner Place LLC by the council, starting with Mr. Mercier, followed by Mr. Edelson. Mr. Mercier. Mr. Mercier? Mr. Mercier? Looks like Mr. Mercier is having technical difficulties. We will continue with cross-examination in the meantime by Mr. Edelson. Mr. Edelson.
All right. I assume if Mr. Mercier gets reconnected, we'll go right back to him. I need a little help, I think, with my first question. Maybe Mr. Ainsworth can help direct it to the right person. But as I read through the late filing, I found myself confused as far as what is the position of the intervener. Are they objecting on the basis that a distributed antenna system or a DAS would be a better alternative to the proposed site? Or are they saying that a macro tower is the appropriate solution, just it's not at the correct site? I'm trying to get an understanding of what is the position of the intervener with regard to the application? Is it the technology, small cell versus macro tower, or is it location 1 versus location 2? And again, I'm not sure who to address this to.
Okay. Generally, I believe theoretically that a small cell technology could work. Our position is that there is a macro.
Attorney Ainsworth, please don't testify.
Thank you.
Please direct a question to one of your witnesses. Thank you.
Then that would be most appropriately directed to Mr. Maxon.
Thank you, Attorney Ainsworth.
Thank you, David Maxon with Isotrope. The first part of my response to the council's inquiries was indeed just that. There was substantial discussion about distributed antenna systems from the members of the council at the last meeting. And I was asked by the council at that time to provide more detail about distributed antenna systems in other parts of the country, which is what the first part of my report is. The primary recommendation that comes out of this report is really related to the coverage analysis and the drive test that we conducted, showing that the coverage from a tower at the DBW site at 15 Meeting House Lane would be quite comparable to the coverage that would be that's being proposed from 118 Newton Road. So that's the primary point of the report.
not trying to put words in your mouth, but you are correct that we have a process where we have asked questions about distributed antenna systems, and really you were just responding to our general inquiry about that as an alternative. But that's really, if you will, despite my concerns maybe about what you submitted, that's not really relevant today. Our real focus should be on whether or not the applicant has done, in my opinion, their due diligence to look at alternative sites and have picked a site that demonstrates it provides the best benefit with the least impact. That's really what's in front of us today. Is that?
I would agree, yes.
Okay. So,
thank you. Excuse me, Mr. Edelson. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think Mr. Mercier is available. You'd like to go back, or do you want to finish your line of questioning?
Well, I think I would prefer to hear from Mr. Mercier first. I think it's a better process when we do it that way. So, yep.
Thank you. Mr. Mercier, were you able to connect?
Seems to be on mute right now. There we go.
Yes, I have reconnected.
Thank you, Mr. Mercier.
I missed some of Mr. Edelson's cross-examination, so I'll just I'll continue on with Mr. Maxon if that's okay.
Certainly.
Mr. Maxon, I'm going to go back to your initial pre-file testimony. That was on August 24th. And attached to that pre-file, there were several coverage plots. One of them was figure 5 that was modeled from 15 Meeting House Lane. And I was just trying to determine where on the parcel was it modeled. Basically, what elevation? Did you do it at a parking lot? Did you do it somewhere down by a wood chip pile? Or do you have that type of detail?
I can certainly look that up and provide that to you. I used a location that was at the elevation, the basic elevation of the paved parking lot next to the DPW garage, which, if you're familiar with the territory there, that's on a berm that's below the elevation of Meeting House Lane, and it's above the elevation of the next parcel that is also owned by the town that has the baseball fields and a material storage lot in it.
Okay. Do you know the elevation of that particular spot, or you said you had to look that up?
This particular spot that I modeled, I don't, but the general elevation of that paved area is in the vicinity of 315 feet above sea level.
Okay, and that was the location where you placed the crane for the CW test that you ran. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, did anyone from the town or other entity direct you to that particular location, or you just chose that because it was a flat area? I'm not sure. I'm just trying to determine why you chose that spot.
And chose that spot for which?
Well, that would be for the model, which is also where your crane was.
All right. For the model, the specific spot I chose, just looking at the aerial photograph and sort of guesstimating as to a location where you could put a fenced area. When we conducted the drive test, the folks at the DPW garage directed us to that north end of the parking area. They had cleared that area of parked vehicles so that we could place the crane there.
Okay, is that also about 315 feet of elevation above sea level?
Yes, approximately.
Sorry, I had the mute on. When you do the CW drive test, and you hook the transmitter up to the crane and you raise it up. When you're driving around trying to determine where the signals are along the roads, are you receiving only signals from the transmitter, or are you picking up other, we'll just say, Cellco signals from adjacent towers?
Just from the transmitter. This is called a CW test. So the receiver is very precisely tuned to a signal that's on just a very narrow frequency. That ensures that there are no interfering signals that would be picked up during the course of the measurements.
Okay. I understand you did 2 drive tests there. That was 120 feet and 150 feet. I'm just trying to determine why you use the 150-foot drive test if you had a plot in your initial modeling from that 15 meeting house lane at 140 feet. And also you requested that that a coverage model from Cellco be produced at 140 feet. So why did you go up an extra 10 feet?
Well, I was looking at the possibility of even potentially 160 feet if necessary. So knowing that we had a baseline and with our 120-foot height coverage measurement, I just thought using 150 feet sort of split the difference between a high location on the site and a relatively low location on the site. And generally, there is not a huge difference in coverage with a 10-foot change in elevation, unless there's a significant terrain feature that's in the way, which is not the case here.
Okay, when you did the 150-foot crane test, did the town provide any input as to what height they would like at that location? Was it 150? Was it 120? Was it 160?
No, I suggested those heights to Winnet, and it was Winnet that agreed to them.
Okay. Have you had the opportunity to look at the coverage plot submitted by Cellco for the 15 Meeting House Lane property? I believe that was at 140 feet.
Yes, I have.
Okay, they had a ground elevation there of 305 feet above mean sea level. So I'm just trying to determine why you had a crane a little bit higher. Well, obviously because of the parking area, but
yes, I looked at the Town of Woodbridge GIS tool on the web, and it has a contour layer, and 305 feet above mean sea level is about halfway down the slope between the berm where the parking area is and the flat ground at the bottom of the berm where the tennis courts and the material storage area is.
Okay, yeah, so it's in a wooded area going down slope. Is that right?
I don't know if the slope is, it's at least partially wooded. I'm not sure if the spot that they, well, the thing is, the spot that they chose was a set of coordinates that I gave them on the pavement at approximately 314, 315 feet above sea level. How their computer tool gave them a 305-foot elevation, I don't know.
Okay. So you don't know if the town actually, okay, so it was coordinates you gave them and they modeled it at a different location is what you're saying, is that right?
No, I've run into this situation myself over the years that the resolution of the terrain database that you're using in a computer model may be something on the order of 10 meters or 30 meters. So the data point that gives you the elevation when you have a bin in your terrain grid that's on the edge of a very steep slope, that data point may not be precisely the correct height. So the way to verify the height would be to go to something like the contour map that is available, which can tell you what the contours are of the parking lot itself.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple questions for Mr. Smook. Mr. Smook, I was looking through the crane test visual assessment material. It appears a photo was taken of the crane when it was at 120 feet and 150 feet for the same locations, except for photo 2. Photo 2 was the view from police department, picture taken facing northeast, visible year-round. I didn't see a corresponding photo of a 150-foot crane from this location. Was that an error, or do you have one that wasn't submitted?
No, the only photo that was taken of the crane was the 120-foot from the parking lot of the Public Works. There are pictures of the 150-foot crane from around the center of town.
Okay, yes, I'm looking at photo 2. It says view from police department. This is page 3 of your analysis. Picture taken facing northeast, visible year-round. I didn't see a corresponding 150-foot crane photograph from this location, however. All the other photos have 120 and 150 for the same location. So I was just wondering why this one wasn't taken at 150.
If I could just clarify, we actually do have the picture. I realized it was just omitted from the report, so we're happy to send it along. There is no, you can't see it from the angle it was taken, but we're happy to submit it.
Okay, just to confirm the location, I see a yellow box around the police department. Was that on the north side of the box, the south side? How is the photograph angled towards the crane?
So the picture was taken, if you notice where there's the police station sign, where it says police business parking only, that was where the picture was taken from, facing the town hall. So
Okay,
that's about 2/3 of the way to the actual building itself.
Okay, thank you. Now, are you familiar with the Woodbridge Green Historic District?
Yes, I am.
Okay, was that the only photo taken from the historic district, from actually within the boundaries?
No, the first picture, which is taken from the town hall, sorry. There was a picture taken from in front of the town hall, that's in the district. There was another picture taken from the fire department across the street at the district. And then there were some pictures taken from off of Center Road towards the district also. I also went back after this was filed and took pictures from the First Church of Christ, the Rectory, the Alice Newton Park, and from the green near the gazebo facing towards the Public Works building, which also illustrated the heavy equipment, the gas pumps, which were visible from the green. Those are not in the report, however.
Mr. Mercier, I would just like to clarify, First Selectman Heller actually made a mistake. 15 Meeting House Lane is not in the historical district. If you review the application that was approved, the actual numbers are 3, 4, 7, and 11 Meeting House Lane, as well as 4 and 10 Newton Road are the official addresses within the district. And we actually have pictures that were taken from 11 Meeting House Lane, which is the town hall, 4 Meeting House Lane, which is the police station. We took pictures from 15 Newton Road, which is actually the corner right and back of where 10 Newton Road is. And then the firehouse that Mitchell is referring to is right in back of 4 Meeting House Lane and 4 Newton Road. Again, all this information I'm happy to send along is in the National Register application for the addresses.
Doesn't the application have a map of the boundaries of the historic district?
Yes.
Okay, so you're stating to me that numerous pictures were taken from within the historic district boundaries.
Yes, or the corner of the street, like the mailbox right across the street from it.
Okay, so not within the boundaries. That's what I was asking.
Two of them were. 4 and 11 were. So 2 of the pictures were.
Okay.
And then after the report was submitted, I went back and took some additional pictures.
Okay, thank you. I have no other questions at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Mercier. We'll now continue with cross-examination by Mr. Edelson. Mr. Edelson.
Thank you, Mr. Morissette. I think I'd like to address my first question to Professor Smook. In the isotope report, it refers to, let me find my point here. It described the Verizon submission as being, quote, variable, inconsistent, and contradictory, close quote. And as I read the report, a lot of that seemed to be focused around the fact that different methodologies came up with different results. Now, a model, as we know, is not reality. A model, whether it's a propagation model or any simulation, is to some degree a simplification. And so we all see that models do not always reflect reality. In fact, we often see similar models coming up with different results, and I'm thinking here of hurricane models that we see trajectories of hurricanes. So from your point of view, when you see in your professional work different methodologies coming up with somewhat different results, do you see that as noting that those models therefore are variable, inconsistent, and contradictory, or that they've just made different approaches to the way they wanted to reflect and portray reality?
Are you sure you want this directed at me as opposed to David?
I do, because I feel like this is a very imprecise way of looking at comparing models. We are always comparing models with different methodologies, but that doesn't mean that they therefore, well, now I'm giving you my opinion. I want your opinion. So that's why I'm asking you, as someone who I believe from your resume works with modeling, albeit not radio propagation modeling, but I assume other models of the way materials might respond in various or under various circumstances or other things of that nature.
Fair enough. With respect to the comments, I did not write those specifically. But with respect to modeling, you're usually taking a physical process that is modeled with a set of equations. These are very often ordinary or partial differential equations. And there could be a time as well as a spatial component to these that require initial conditions and boundary conditions. And providing that you have the correct initial and boundary conditions for that problem, and you can solve it on a fine enough grid, you should get a very good result, providing all the physics is embedded in those equations.
Okay, that was a lot of assumptions there too, but I'll take that for your answer. Thank you. So my next question, I think, would be for the Greengardens, and I probably would say you can answer this individually. But if I understand what's in front of us, is that the applicant has proposed a site, and the intervener has indicated that their work to identify that site did not take into account all the logical or all the available alternatives. And in particular, we're looking at Meeting House Lane. Now, here's a corporation, from what we can see, is going to spend upwards of $500,000 on this answer to a coverage gap that seems to be well accepted, that there is a need for enhanced coverage and capacity in a certain area of Woodbridge. And I'm curious, as you have put your position together and you have tried to show that there is a better site, why do you think that a corporation like Verizon that's going to be spending money would not want to use the best available site for meeting their coverage and capacity? And I'll put out there, do you think it's because they lack competency in doing site search? Or do you think it's just their lack of knowledge about how to locate antennas?
Mr. Edelson, if I can refer you back to the original site search that Verizon submitted, one of the locations that they were entertaining was the town's public works area on Meeting House Lane in Woodbridge. They did not do a drive test at that location to determine how it measured up to the 118 Newton Road. And that's why, as a group, we hired the experts based on feedback that we received from you about a gold standard drive-by test. We rented a crane, we hired experts, we used our own money, thousands of dollars as private citizens, to be able to compare the apples to apples that were alluded to. So I don't have the answer why they don't want to go there. I only know that they didn't have all the information that's now available to them in making that decision.
And if I may, no one is disputing that we need perhaps enhanced coverage of a cell tower in the Woodbridge area. It just would be best to be suited for the whole of Woodbridge and the town member residents for it to be at the 15 Meeting House Lane site, where it would benefit the town as well as the residents, as opposed to a private citizen and in a much more residential area.
And it would have less of a scenic impact at that location.
But you are aware at the prior hearing, if I understood correctly, Verizon testified that they felt that the coverage was not as good from the Meeting House locations. That was their position. So therefore, I want to just be clear if I'm understanding you correctly. So your position is they did not do the appropriate modeling or analysis of the radio propagation from that site, from those alternative sites.
If I understand you correctly, we feel that we did the due diligence that would have been nice for Verizon to have done at the 15 Meeting House Lane site to make it comparable in seeing which place suited the needs of Verizon and the residents of Woodbridge.
And I believe I'm correct in saying that no one from the town of Woodbridge came to AT&T and offered the site. Is that your understanding too?
I'm not sure that's accurate, because I believe in the interrogatories that the town submitted, they did offer them the site at 15 Sound.
They said they would entertain it.
I'm sorry, there was some I didn't hear the last part. I heard somebody else speaking at the same time.
I believe in the interrogatories that the town submitted, they offered, when the question was asked about other sites that they would consider, the site at 15 Meeting House Lane was recommended by the town in their interrogatories.
And I guess my last question is for Mr. Maxon. As I referred to before, in your report, you characterize Verizon as their submission as being variable, inconsistent, and contradictory. And what I wasn't clear about is you then talked about 4 different areas, and one of those seemed below that. Are those the 4 areas that you believe their submission was variable, inconsistent, and contradictory? Or were there other things in addition? I wasn't sure if you had delineated everything right there in the report, or that was a more general statement.
Thank you. I think this relates to your question to Professor Smook as well. The 2 coverage maps, existing coverage maps that I provided, were not with different models. They were with the same model done by Verizon with different settings. And what I was using the circles and arrows on the 2 maps to illustrate places where it was obvious that they were using different settings to produce what should have been the same coverage. And in fact, I have also looked at the analysis recently submitted with 15 Meeting House Lane at these same areas. And the existing coverage outside of the reach of their 15 Meeting House Lane model is different yet again from the model they submitted, the analysis they submitted with the technical report, which is different from the analysis that they submitted with their application. So my point is that using the exact same tool, they have come up with 3 different representations of coverage, which means that the representation of coverage of the different locations, like the alternative location and the proposed location, are also variable from one session to another on the Verizon tool. So it's not that we're comparing their model to my model, which I agree would be like comparing spaghetti models for hurricanes. And there is statistical accuracy of each model, and they may not, one does not prove another one wrong. But when you're using the exact same model 3 different times, and 3 different times you're using different settings, you have variable and inconsistent inputs producing variable and inconsistent outputs. And then the next step in my report is I look at their scan test of existing coverage, and it's entirely different from their computer projections. So what we have is a whole set of data that is internally generated by Verizon that's conflicting.
Well, thanks for that clarification. I'm going to have to go back and look at the report because I came away with a very different understanding. So I appreciate that. So just to be clear, because as you know, we received many applications from Verizon, and as far as I know, always using the similar or the same model, obviously with different parameters for different locations. So your comment is really, or your observations are really are specific to this submission, not to their modeling technology or their modeling methods in general.
Well, it does place into question how rigorous they are with other presentations. But in this particular case, the 3 presentations made at 3 different times are different when one would expect them to be outside of the area of influence of proposed facilities. One would expect that the settings for the model would not change, and they apparently have changed from one time to the next in this hearing.
But if I understand correctly, and as you know, one of the reasons we're here today was to give Verizon the opportunity to submit modeling results from the other locations we've been talking about. But if I read you correctly, you basically implied we shouldn't even pay any attention to those because of this prior issue of contradictory results. You were basically telling, the way I read it, that I as a commissioner should, pay no attention to those diagrams, they can't be trusted. And I'm very concerned about that because on the one hand, are you making a statement about methodology, general, or just because of what's happening here in Woodbridge? So maybe you can clarify a little bit more about how I should interpret your caution about looking at their new submission or late filing exhibits.
Right. I apologize if you're hearing a train in the background. The methodology used in this hearing relied on their computer model, which is a well-respected tool, computer modeling tool. But it relied on settings that were changed from one time to the next, creating a moving target in terms of what the existing gap is and what a proposed facility would do or an alternative facility would do to address that gap. I can't speak to other proceedings where I haven't compared, because the applicant declined to provide us with those inputs, that they didn't go to that level of detail to explaining what their settings were in their computer model. There are many settings.
I think you really answered my question when you said, confirm, please correct me if I'm wrong, that the tool itself is not in question. They are using a tool, a technology that I think you said well respected, understood in the industry to be a solid tool for one to use. Any tool can be misused, there's no doubt about that, but it's not the tool itself that you're concerned about.
That's correct.
Thank you. I think, Mr. Morissette, with that, that's all the questions I have right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edelson. We'll now continue with cross-examination by Mr. Silvestri, followed by Ms. Cooley. Mr. Silvestri.
Thank you, Mr. Morissette. Unfortunately, from our last hearing, we ran out of time before I was able to come up with my set of questions. So I'm going to backtrack to what I had from that hearing back in August. But also, unfortunately, I did have follow-up questions from Ms. Godwa and Mr. Logan, but I don't see them on my screen. Are they present?
They are not, sir.
Okay. All right. I'll cross that one off. Okay. Mr. Greengarden, good afternoon, and you're next on my list for follow-ups from our last hearing. The questions I have for you go back to the responses to council interrogatories number 1 that have the various photographs that are there. The first question I have for you, there were different millimeter lenses that were used with the Nikon camera. I saw 26 millimeter, 35, 44, 46, etc. Why were different millimeters used?
I'm actually not a photographer by trade, but the camera I use has an automatic lens. And when you aim it at a subject, it sets the millimeters by itself.
Oh, thank you. I didn't realize that those are automatic as well. So thank you on that one. A follow-up question on that, and I'm not sure if you can answer. Do you know if any of the millimeter lenses or the settings actually represent what is seen by the naked eye without any type of magnification?
I think that the subject that you're taking the picture of is actually closer than what the lens is portrays.
Closer. Okay. All right. And then one follow-up question on that. On page 23 of that report, it has an iPhone picture there. And I'm curious if you have any idea how an iPhone compares in millimeters to the Nikon camera.
I honestly can't answer your question. I don't know.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have for you, Mr. Greengarden, and I thank you for that as well. Mr. Maxon, thank you. Mr. Maxon, you're next on my list. Again, going back to the hearing in August where I couldn't pose a question. If you look at the August 24th isotope report that you have and the coverage plots, there's what I'll call a square, a bisected square that appears on various maps, and I'm trying to figure out what those bisected squares are. For example, on figure 5, which you had talked about with Mr. Mercier, if you look at that and just to the right of where it says Hamden in yellow, there's one of those squares. Could you tell me what those are? Because they tend to move around on the coverage plots.
That's a great question. Yes, I can. When we tend to take screenshots of the maps so that we can format them for presentation, and sometimes we leave the cursor on the screen when we snap the screenshot rather than moving it off the screen. That's essentially that's the cursor, and it has no bearing on the meaning of the map itself.
Okay, thank you for that one. I was trying to figure that out for the longest time because they kept popping here and there. So thank you on that one. Going back, when I look at the original application coverage plots for 118 Newtown Road, and then I look at what was submitted by Verizon for the late file. Unfortunately for me, and I'll pose this question also to Verizon, but unfortunately for me, I'm kind of looking at two different scales of their coverage maps, so it's a little bit hard for me to compare apples to apples, if you will. But I'm curious, when I look at it, I'm kind of looking at what's at 15 Meeting House Lane and saying, gee, the coverage isn't bad. And I look at what they provided for 118 Newtown Road, and I say, okay, that's what they're proposing. I'm looking at these and saying, to me, they're kind of equal. So I'm kind of curious as to what your interpretation of the comparison of Verizon's coverage plots originally submitted for 118 Newtown Road and 15 Meeting House Lane play out.
Okay, I've just had my attention directed to my maps with my cursors. I see we've moved on to the Verizon's original submissions and then their recent 115 Meeting House Lane submission.
Correct, yes. Again, I'm looking at it and the scale are different, but I'm looking at all the different colors that are there and I'm trying to get it straight in my mind what looks like 118 Newtown Road for coverage and what they had submitted just recently for 15 Meeting House Lane. And I'm looking at that and say, gee, the color pattern seems there. They almost seem to overlay if the scales were right. And again, I'll pose this question to them when the time comes, but I'm curious as to what your interpretation of that comparison between those two coverage plots is.
I didn't spend a whole lot of time focusing on that because we did do the CW drive test, which is, as discussed at the previous meeting, a more precise way of representing coverage, at least on the roads. But what I had anticipated was that we wouldn't see a tremendous amount of difference despite the change in ground elevation of the tower, partly because the tower potentially could be taller at 15 Meeting House Lane, but also because I have this kind of general concept about radio propagation that I like to describe as trying to eliminate a mixing bowl. You can put a little lamp at the bottom of the mixing bowl and light it going uphill. Or you can put a lamp on the rim of the mixing bowl and light it down. So the way the terrain rises as you head north, you're not losing a tremendous amount of coverage simply because you've moved from 118 Newton to 15 Meeting House and you've lowered the elevation of the base of the tower. It's still illuminating pretty much the same general area. And my expectation was that their computer model should show that. There may be some subtle differences because of the orientation with respect to smaller hills and things, but the general coverage, and this is why we recommended it from the beginning, it looked like the general coverage would be substantially addressed from 15 Meeting House.
No, thank you for that response. One follow-up question I do have for you. Again, with the Verizon late file that came in for 15 Meeting House Lane, and any comments on how their coverage plot would compare to what you came up with at 15 Meeting House Lane?
How their coverage plot would compare with our drive test?
With that, or what you had for, I forgot what height that you did the 15 Meeting House Lane at. But I'm curious how apples might compare to apples if they do it all here.
Yeah, my recollection is that my original propagation model of a 15 Meeting House Lane was a little more optimistic, shall we say, than Verizon's. And I would note that in that progression of 3 different settings for Verizon's maps, going from the original technical report to the application to the 15 Meeting House Lane map that they presented this week, last week, their model has gotten progressively more pessimistic. In other words, the baseline coverage underneath the proposed coverage is reducing each step you go forward, which means that the coverage of the facility under test is also being reduced proportionately. So if they had showed 15 Meeting House Lane coverage using the settings they used in the technical report, it would look far better than it does using the settings they used last week.
Just a clarification, if you will, Mr. Maxon, when you say the baseline coverage underneath, could you explain that a little bit better?
Yes, that was not a term of art by any means. What I did with my comparison of their technical report filing and their application filing was I looked at locations on the map where the facility of interest in the middle has no influence, and looked at what their existing coverage looks like at those remote locations. And even though you might have a different facility under test in the middle, when you're looking out at these locations where that facility has no influence, you should see the exact same existing coverage. And you don't. It gets progressively more pessimistic from technical report to application to this most recent submission, which means the coverage footprints are shrinking. And so when I mentioned the existing baseline, that's what I'm referring to, is that existing coverage outside the influence of the facility that's being demonstrated.
So if I could kind of rephrase that so I'm understanding it, if you look at a proposed coverage plot, if you stripped away what's being proposed by a new cell tower, you would have a baseline. And if I understand you correctly, you're saying that if you strip that away from the different plots that were provided, the baseline is a little bit different from one to the other?
Yes, it's apparent to me that the settings they used to create the computer model for those 3 different steps in the process, 3 different submissions, changed to be progressively more pessimistic. In other words, to progressively show less coverage from each cell site.
Gotcha. I think I understand that. Thank you, Mr. Maxon.
Thank you.
Mr. Morissette, that's all the questions I have, and I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Silvestri. We now continue with cross-examination by Ms. Cooley.
Thank you, Mr. Morissette. I just have one question, just to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly. And this is to the previous witness, Mr. Maxim. When you're talking about the differences that you are seeing from the testing that you are doing compared to Verizon, you have only looked at the 2, what they were calling alternative sites, but you didn't do any kind of testing on the 118 Newton Road site at all, any modeling for that. So there isn't any comparison to Verizon's data from that site. Is that correct?
For any modeling for 118 Newton Road?
Yep.
Yes, in my original submission, I think we provided a model of that, yes.
Okay, and did you see the same kinds of differences between your work and Verizon's models in that, or?
The differences between my models and Verizon's models are, as discussed earlier, likely to be the kinds of differences you see when you're looking at 2 different models of a hurricane track or predicted hurricane track.
Mhm.
Yes, there are differences. The way my computer model predicts the impact of certain things like diffraction over terrain or path loss through vegetation at different frequencies and those kind of things. So I would expect to see some differences in my computer model and Verizon's computer model. The thing that I was calling attention to last week was that in Verizon's computer model, there are differences each time they use the model.
Mhm. Okay. All right. I think I get that then. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. I think that covers it for me for now. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Morissette.
Thank you, Ms. Cooley. Mr. Maxon, I have a couple of questions for you relating to your late file. Figures 5 and 6, I found quite interesting. And the conclusion that you came up with was that figure 5 had better coverage because Hamden was off in the model. Can you elaborate on how that could be with Hamden being off and having better coverage? I would have intuitively thought the opposite.
Sorry, I muted. Yes, I think you've got the crux of my point. Is I picked a couple of locations where I used the orange arrows and the orange circle to mark points of comparison. I picked those locations because they're well out of the influence of the coverage from the Hamden facility. So if this were an existing coverage map, what's under the orange circle on both pages and what's under the orange arrow on both pages should be identical. But some settings had to have changed between those two sessions when they produced the maps for the technical report and when they produced the maps for the application, regardless of whether or not Hamden was turned on. And that's what I used to kind of illustrate this moving target that the settings for the model have shifted from one session to the next.
Very good. Thank you for that clarification. If you could provide some clarification on the differences between a scan test and a CW test. My fundamental understanding is that the CW test is with a transmitter on the crane and including the proposed facility, where the scan test is just the existing transmitter without other facilities incorporated into the readings?
Almost. The
Okay.
CW test is specifically intended to measure a proposed height at a proposed facility location and nothing else. So when you get out to the edges of your CW test, you're not picking up other cell sites. You're just getting a weaker and weaker and weaker signal of your site under test. When you do a scan test, you're scanning the existing network for the best signal, and you're recording what the best signal is. And when you do that, you also collect data like, well, which cell site is giving us the best signal on this corner, and other sort of quality of service indications. But the basic information in the scan test is what's the strongest signal at this particular location where the vehicle is at this moment. And so that's an existing coverage test, whereas the CW test is a proposed coverage of only the proposed facility, not of the entire network.
Very good. Thank you for that clarification. Mr. Greengarden, I'd like to give you the opportunity to, I interrupted you earlier on the record and give you the opportunity to voice your objection at this point, if you would like.
I just wanted to say that we worked hard and that we asked for the extension of time so that we were able to get the SHPO's feedback to make everything fair all the way around. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Mr. Greengarden. That concludes my questioning as well. We will now take a 10-minute break. We will be back at 3:40, and we will continue with cross-examination by Attorney Baldwin. Thank you. We'll see everyone at 3:40.